Holy moly, we are all loud and clear. How about you, Rob? How was your couple weeks?
Oh, pretty good. We actually just got back from the Topsail Island, North Carolina. That was interesting. I've never been there before.
Whoa.
Fabulous. Oh, I'll be right back. Hello?
You're not muted.
I think she is. I think she is now.
Good.
She's now, yeah.
You never know.
All right, it's 7 o'clock. Let's give Lori a minute to jump back on and we'll get started.
Hi, Mike.
Hello.
Hi, Mike.
All right, Lori, so you're back. All right.
I'm back.
Okay, so let's go ahead and get started. Good evening, everybody. This is Rob Walker and Lori Bell and Jose. We're here to hold the next installment of the Wiehle Avenue Crossing Study Group. We've been a group that's been meeting for almost really the entire year. I'll quickly summarize where we are. I think most of the people on the call have been with us. But we've explored a lot of the options that were in the original application for the Campus Commons development. We went ahead and then explored some alternative crossings, such as a tunnel. And then at our last meeting, we had the benefit of the Fairfax County Department of Transportation and their consultant give us a presentation, which was very informative. And tonight we're going to have what we kind of call part 2 of that presentation, because it gets into a lot more detail, and it actually even provides some cost information, which I know a lot of us have been anxiously awaiting. I will point out we did try to get this information out to those who've been kind of officially on the committee and who we have emails for. So hopefully some of you had this presentation in advance, but if you don't, we can certainly provide it to you after the meeting. So what we were hoping to do tonight, there's an agenda on the screen. Lori's going to go over some ground rules, just our traditional ground rules. I guess I'm out of order. I'm already doing the summary, but what we hope to do is have the presentation, and then we're going to go into questions, and we want to hear from everybody tonight and hear your thoughts about tonight's presentation and some of your thoughts. And then I did want to highlight that part of what Jose has sent out to the group are some of the answers to questions that have been posed in past meetings. And so if there's time tonight, I might want to go and summarize some of those answers so that you all are aware we have been putting answers to some of the questions that they've been coming out in more email than they have been in discussion on the past meetings. So with that, let me turn this over to Lori to talk about the ground rules.
Well, if you've been part of our team for the past almost year, you know them. We are an extraordinarily respectful group. Everybody gets an opportunity to speak if you raise your hand. We're going to try and stay on target. We begin and end at exactly the same time. We don't go past 9 o'clock. If it's 9 o'clock and we're in the middle of something, we say good night and we join you at our next meeting. So in order to hear from everybody and in order to hear from the presentation, I don't know how long it will take. And I am excited to learn about some of the things. And I would, I think we're going to have questions as we go along. And so I encourage you to get out your pencil and your paper right now and jot them down. And if you see something on page 12 that you want to ask a question about, write it down so that you're ready to ask that question later and you don't forget your great thoughts. I think that's all that I can think of. Jose is going to grab your questions. You can also put them in chat if that's easier. Then he can just grab them and cut and paste them into our continuing documentation of what we've been doing here. We've got documentation from every meeting that we've had. We have every question that you've asked, and we're going to try and answer them all so that by the end, hopefully after this next presentation, really we're going to do some solutioning and we're going to do some soul searching. And so actually the next meeting is going to be a little harder and more participatory than these have been, because you are going to be the one helping us, telling us why you feel a certain way. So we want to make sure we give you enough information tonight and answer a bunch of questions. So without further ado, I think we want to get started.
Okay,
Bob,
thank
I have one more question for you.
Sure.
I have just one more question. Are you growing a beard?
This is, yeah, my fall look.
Your fall beard?
Yeah.
Okay, just checking. I was just checking. He's going rogue. It's almost no shave November.
So,
Okay.
just a reminder, when we get to the question part, there on the lower right-hand part of your screen, there should be a participants button. And if you hit the participants button, it'll bring a list of the participants up on the right-hand side of the screen. Then at the bottom of that, there's a little hand, and you can click the hand to allow you to, kind of raise your hand if you have a question at the time when we have question and answer. And then there's a way to actually then lower your hand after your question's been answered. So I'll probably remind everybody again, but I know there's often a lot of questions about that. So,
Rob,
yes.
this is Tammy. There was Maggie Parker just said if you're working on a laptop, participants and what's up on the screen are not easily visible. So I just wanted to FYI you that.
Okay, thanks, Tammy. Yeah, I'm on a laptop, and I know it's troublesome. It's not like I'm at work where I have bigger screens.
So you can also raise your hand like this, and Rob or I will call on you. Okay.
That's always good as well. Okay, so I'm going to turn this over to Mark Dreyfus. Mark Dreyfus is from the Fairfax County Department of Transportation. Mark's been terrific at being with us on I think he's been every meeting, and very helpful. And he has his team of consultants with us tonight as well. And of course, Mark, with Tom Bashadny and others. And so we really appreciate their input on all this. And Mark, I'll hand it over to you.
All right. Thank you, Rob. You're right. I have not missed a meeting. How could I? This has been. I agree with everything you said and everything Lori said. I think this group has been really delving into the issues, asking a lot of really good questions, and look forward to what kind of questions you're going to have tonight. So for those of you who maybe couldn't make it to the last meeting. Tonight, we're going to be providing part 2 of the presentation that we started last time. This is intentionally part 2. We didn't run out of time, but what we talked about last time was some initial analysis that our consulting firm of Fair and Peers did, and tonight we're going to dive a little deeper into that. They've been doing a lot of really good work, and so. We're going to have Cullen McCormick will be presenting for Fair and Peers, presented at the last meeting. And then we also have Sagar Adiprakar from STV, which is an engineering firm, and they're some consultants. And so we're going to have a lot of great information this evening. What I'm going to do is hopefully Cullen can share the presentation. And and I'm going to turn it over to him, and he'll walk you through all the information this evening. So, Colin.
Great. Yeah, thanks, Mark. I'll go ahead and start sharing the presentation.
Okay. Yeah, while that's coming up, I just want to mention, when we're done with the presentation, there'll be an opportunity to ask questions, and then depending on time, then we'll open it up to more discussion now that we have all this information and we've discussed all of the different options. So as Lori said, if you have questions, please hold them, and there will certainly be time to ask any questions you may have in the presentation. Colin, take it away.
Great. Thanks, Mark. Great to be here again with everyone this evening here. So as Mark mentioned, we'll go ahead and pick right up where we left off with some additional details about the various crossings of Wiehle Avenue. So these are the main topics that we're going to cover this evening. We'll start out with, and I'll get into some of the details here in just a minute, but we'll start out with this walk shed comparison. We'll get into a walk time comparison of the different crossings, and I'll turn it over to STV, who will talk about crossing refinements, some of the kind of engineering stuff they've looked into. And at the end, we'll close out with some preliminary cost estimates for what it would take to actually build and maintain the various alternatives. So first up, as I mentioned, is walk shed here. We'll get right into it. Before we do that, though, just a quick refresher of the 6 crossing alternatives that we're studying here. As you may recall from last month, there are 3 bridges. One on the left there that you see has a kind of a long ramp on the west side of Wiehle Avenue, and then an elevator and stairs on the right side. Option B in the middle has elevators and stairs on both sides. Option C has a ramp on the west side and then connects into one of the buildings of the proposed campus commons site on the east side. And then over on the second page here, we've got the tunnel alternative that will essentially punch through the 2 retaining walls that are just south of the toll road off ramps there. And then 2 intersection crossing, or 2 at-grade crossings, I should say. One at the intersection with high visibility crosswalks, and then one at a mid-block, which has a hawk signal. We showed a picture of that last month. Essentially what that is sort of like a signal that only turns on when someone's trying to cross the street. So the first up then is the walk shed comparison. Essentially what this is it asks the question of how far can someone actually travel using sidewalks and walkways in the area. And we picked 2 kind of common units of time here, 5 and 10 minutes, kind of about the average length someone can walk in about a quarter mile or so. This is all, of course, assuming the shortest travel time, so not having to wait for things like signals and elevators, just kind of how far could you possibly go in these times. It's, as you'll see, it's not sort of everywhere you can go. It's if you took a particular route and then just kind of what we did is a sort of a software analysis that combines all those different routes together to create this area. And we do this, of course, to see how much access the different crossing alternatives provide in the way of getting to key places around the Wiehle Avenue area. So this is kind of the overview of what you'll see on the following slides. There are the red lines that originate from the center of the crossing that represent all the possible formal walking routes you could take. So again, we're not really looking at cut-throughs or going through someone's backyard or something like that. This is just kind of main routes here. Then in the darker shade of yellow, you'll see the 5-minute walk shed, which is again everywhere one could possibly go in about 5 minutes. And then the lighter shade of yellow is the same thing, but at a 10-minute distance. So the first up you can see here is bridge option A, that kind of play symbol with the triangle is where it starts from, and that will move around with the various crossings. You can see here there's pretty good coverage if you go north and kind of to the south and west as well. And east, I should say also. Bridge A here actually has the smallest of the footprints of walk sheds here. Bridge B, owing to its tighter footprint of not having any real out of direction travel in the area of the bridge itself, allows you to go a little bit further in the same amount of time. You can see that the walk shed pushes a little bit further north and to the west. Option C, which again is further south and has some sort of unique elements to it, has more of a coverage in the kind of south of Sunrise Valley neighborhood area, but doesn't let you get quite as far to the north, given that it's generally positioned further south of the other 2 bridge crossings. So then we get to the tunnel here, which kind of has a better coverage than the last bridge crossing, but as we'll see in a comparison a little bit later, is not the largest footprint. The largest ones actually go to the intersection at grade crossings. This is generally due to basically not having to go out of your way to use these. There's no up and down, there's no tunnels, they're just kind of, you wait at the crosswalk and you go. So the intersection crossing here is the largest footprint of all of the different crossing alternatives. And then the mid-block one you see here last, because it's a little bit further south, it has a different profile here in terms of its coverage. These are all fun and good to look at, but it's probably easiest if we compare them all in a graph here. So what you'll see is the lineal feet, that's the distance you can cover. Those are the red lines on the previous maps. The watershed area of the 5 minutes, and then the watershed area of the 10 minutes. If you can follow the contours of these graphs, you'll know that they generally go from largest to smallest. There's this interesting wrinkle, though, which is the tunnel alternative. What we believe is happening here is that because it requires a lot of out-of-direction travel in the very immediate area of the tunnel, but if you're walking through the redeveloped campus common site, you're kind of already at grade with the tunnel because it's already sunken down below the grade of Wiehle Avenue. You can actually go further to the south and east with that alternative. So it bumps up kind of where you can go in a longer period of time, but you're constrained in the smaller amount of time simply because there's so much elevation change to get to distances in the immediate area. So again, as you can see here, rolling this all up, the intersection crossing allows you to go the farthest in this amount of time. And then the Bridge A option has the shortest footprint or the shortest distance you can cover in the same amount of time. And so just some key takeaways from this analysis here. Generally speaking, the crossings all provide similar coverage. You can get to major areas in the station area, commercial sites, office sites, large portions of the neighborhoods around Sunrise Valley. The at-grade crossings, as we mentioned earlier, tend to have the largest walkshed. Again, this is due to the lack of out-of-direction travel, no grade changes, and then, as we mentioned here, the intersection crossing has the overall best coverage. Just kind of what is the scale of the magnitude of the difference between the kind of best ranking crossing, the intersection, and then the one with the smallest footprint, Bridge A? It's about a 15% decrease in the lineal feet, again, the kind of it's the amount of path you can cover, and then a 25% decrease in the 5-minute watershed between the two comparisons. So again, sort of some differences here, but I think the key takeaway is they all provide generally similar coverage. So that kind of concludes the first portion of the analysis here. The second piece is related to the walk time comparison, which is kind of similar, but allows us to contrast the alternatives in a slightly different light. Essentially what this does is we took 2 points kind of in the area that represent a pretty typical trip that someone might make, beginning from the Wiehle West and East station entrance. So if you're familiar with the area, this would be basically at the escalators that lead you from kind of the bus bays where the buses get off the freeway or the toll road and then head up into the station area. And from that point, then the walking route here would continue south and to the east to the intersection of Sunrise Valley and Campus Commons Drive. Essentially what we did is we just calculated the walking time that a typical person would need to do this route following different alignments, different walking routes that take into accommodation the various different crossing alternatives. We're doing this, of course, again, as a real world comparison of, basically how efficient each of these crossing alternatives is for getting to and from common destinations in the area, taking into consideration things like out of direction travel or elevation change that are inherent to each of the crossing alternatives. So this essentially will help you navigate the following graphics in the couple slides that are after this. You'll see these bar charts that show basically the range of walking time. The furthest you can get, assuming that you kind of nail it and you get all of the lights green and you don't have to wait for elevators and things like that. That's that lighter shade of color. The minimum walk time there is if you happen to get stuck at every intersection, just to kind of give you the full gamut of possibilities here for your travel time. And then what we've done with the colors is you'll see there are essentially 3 groupings of walking routes. There are those that follow the west sidewalk of Wiehle Avenue. So you can think of that as the existing routes that are out there right now on the ground. Those that would follow a new sidewalk along the east side of Wiehle Avenue in the black there. And then last up, the routes that would follow a cut through of the campus commons site. So taking advantage of some of the new walkways that the applicant will be building on that parcel. So first up, we'll look at the Wiehle Avenue West sidewalk here. You can see the kind of the thumbnails of the routes at the bottom there. The one on the left basically takes you along the south side of Sunrise Valley Drive, up the west side of Wiehle Avenue and then through the transit station plaza. The next one there assumes that you take a more of an informal path through Commerce Metro Center. We looked at this because we saw a lot of evidence that people are already doing this path and wanted to just sort of be able to include that in the comparison here. And so generally you see walking times between about 6 minutes and close to 9 minutes. When we look at routes on the east side of Wiehle Avenue, generally, as you can see, the travel times are a bit longer. And you can see why that's the case. If you look at some of the thumbnails at the bottom of the slide here, you've got that kind of corkscrew turn in the bridge option C, where you actually have to go down a set of steps, enter one of the buildings on the development site, go up an elevator rather, to access the grade of the bridge. Some other ones, like the tunnel, for example, involve going down a set of stairs, passing through the site, and then kind of making more of a meandering route over the station. Bridge option A, as you may recall from the thumbnail image earlier of the kind of the bridge profile, has that a ramp on the west side that doubles back. And so what you're finding here is that there's generally longer routes that require, in most cases, some form of elevation change. So in some cases up to almost 12 minutes, which is a solid 3 minutes over the longest time you would have had on the Wiehle Avenue West sidewalk. So then the last set of things we looked at was the Campus Commons cut through. Again, this is if you cross to the north side of Sunrise Valley from that intersection, pass through some of the paths on the site, and then continue along your journey across Wiehle Avenue. And what you see here that's kind of interesting is there's some real winners and losers. Because some of the routes can take advantage of the lack of grade change, like the tunnel, for example, where the tunnel, which of course is below the grade of Wiehle Avenue, doesn't really require you to change grade. It's actually pretty efficient in terms of the time. But then you have some of these crossings that require you to go up to the grade of Wiehle Avenue from that kind of lower area where the site is, like, for example, the mid-block crossing, or some of the bridges, of course, that require you to not only go up from the kind of lower level of the site to the grade of Wiehle Avenue, but then continue further up to go over the bridge. And those generally contribute to longer travel times. So when we stack these all up again, like we did for the last set of data, you can see that really, if you're going to be making this journey, your fastest option is still probably going to be using the existing routes. Generally speaking, the cut-through routes do a little bit better in terms of saving you time than those routes that follow the east sidewalk. However, the notable exception is the third shortest. Again, looking at the sort of the shortest travel times here, but the third shortest is the Wiehle East sidewalk, which would give you a fairly comparable travel time to the west sidewalk, owing to how similar those routes are. So again, like we did with the last comparison here, there's a couple of key takeaways. As I mentioned, existing routes along the west side of Wiehle Avenue, appear to be still the fastest if you're doing this travel. The things related to, basically the more traffic signals you have to go through, the more elevators you have to wait for, increase your variability, and so can, make sort of less certainty of your trip. And then last up, as we mentioned, the campus common routes actually do provide a competitive advantage over the Wiehle Avenue East sidewalk, but again, that's still, in most cases, is not enough to save you time over the existing routes. So that gets us through the first kind of comparison analysis here. At this point, I'll turn it over to Sagar at STV, who will walk us through some of the work they did to describe crossing refinements. And I think before I let him get into it, he's going to describe some of the folks on his team who've been helping out with the work here.
Great. Thank you, Colin. Again, my name is Sagar Adivrekar, and I am a structural engineer with STV in our Virginia office. With me, I also have our engineering director, Derek Overstreet. So before I go into detail about our crossing refinements and design feasibility, he will briefly speak about STV's experience with similar kind of work. Over to you, Derek.
Thank you, Sagar. Sagar mentioned I'm Derek Overstreet. I actually manage our bridge and structures practice for STV in Virginia and Washington, D.C. And, as we looked at this project with Fair and Peers, we apply a lot of our past experience in pedestrian bridge and pedestrian tunnel experience. And in the last 15 years that I've been with STV, I've been involved in a number of pedestrian bridge and pedestrian tunnel projects. Right now we're actually involved in the design of 6 different pedestrian bridges for the Virginia Railway Express in Northern Virginia. I've also been involved in a VDOT project that had a shared use path bridge over an interstate near Roanoke, Virginia. And I've also been involved in other pedestrian bridges in North Carolina. As far as tunnel experience includes, I've got both design and construction experience. On the construction side, I've been involved in a number of micro tunnels and hand mine tunnels. And then on the design side, I've actually designed a pedestrian tunnel in Spotsylvania County. We're looking at a few concepts for VRE at some of their stations. And I also designed a vehicular and pedestrian tunnel underpass in Hanover. So we've got a lot of experience, and we've applied a lot of the lessons learned and past knowledge and looking at this crossing projects that we've been very excited about. So I'll turn things back over to Sagar.
Thank you, Derek. Can we go to the slide 25? Thanks. So as Cullen mentioned, we at STV reviewed the applicant's 3 bridge crossing. Those are the option A, B, and C for concept refinements, design feasibility, and also some utility conflicts. STV also developed a tunnel option. We looked for similar things, like we looked for the design feasibility as well as any utility conflicts. At the end, we also developed a rough order of magnitude cost for each of these alternatives. Next slide. So these are the alternatives that we studied. The intersection and the mid block doesn't have any structural elements to it, like a bridge or a tunnel. That's why we did not study those. But these are the 3 bridge alternatives that were the applicants that we studied, and we assessed a tunnel option. And I think as we have, Cullen has talked about these thumbnails before, bridge option A kind of has a ramp that is very close to the metro station exit, and then an elevator on the east. The bridge option B has elevator on both the sides, and the bridge option C has a ramp on the west that goes along Wiehle Avenue, and then crosses the bridge, and then it is connected to one of the buildings on the east side. So in terms of concept refinements, we looked at the applicant's bridge, and they provided a minimum vertical clearance of 17 feet. We recommend providing 17-foot 6-inch of vertical clearance. Normally for the highway bridges, a vertical clearance is 16-foot 6, and the AASHTO LRFD guide specification for pedestrian bridges requires us to have an 1 foot higher than highway bridges. So we recommend 17-foot 6 as a vertical clearance. Next slide, please. The applicant's bridge had a face-to-face width of a bridge to be 6 feet. To accommodate our bicycles and pedestrians on that bridge, we recommend having a 14-foot wide bridge with a clear width. The 10-foot would be for the pathway, and then 2-foot buffers on each side. On this picture, you see a pedestrian fencing that is on the bridge. The applicant's bridge had a 3-foot high pedestrian railing all along the bridge, the ramps, and the stairs. We would recommend like 3-foot 6 inches tall pedestrian railing, at least on the ramp and the stairs. However, on the bridge, we would recommend having a pedestrian railing that has a handrail to it. And essentially, this pedestrian railing will prevent any objects being thrown off the bridge on Wiehle Avenue. The next slide. We also recommend some pedestrian lighting for the nighttime use. The applicant's concept did not include any details on the lighting, so that is one thing which would add to a bridge. The next slide. So when we looked at these 3 bridge options, the ABC, there are bridge piers that is right in the median, as well as there would be piers to to the ramps that get on the bridge. And there were no pier protection systems in place on the plans. Essentially, as you see in that picture, if there is a bridge pier, you need to ensure that it is protected from any vehicular collision. And that system essentially is a ground-mounted crash-worthy barrier that has a guardrail attached to it. And the guardrail also has an impact attenuator attached to the guardrail. So we recommend having some form of this kind of a pier protection system to protect the bridge piers. Next slide. And talking about the same thing, as a refinement for the bridge option A and B, we recommend relocating the bridge further south along Wiehle Avenue, so there is enough space to put a bridge protection barrier. And as you remember from the previous slides, the option A and B also has elevator towers. We recommend relocating them away from the traffic lanes as well. And on option C, the one that had the elevated ramp along Wiehle Avenue, we would recommend moving it further west so that the impacts to an existing retaining wall, which is there along Wiehle Avenue, as well as the sidewalks will be reduced. And these are some other concept refinements that we think would add a little bit more to the bridge, is a metal bollard to just prevent motorized vehicles to access the ramp for the option A and option C. The other thing that we thought about is trying to blend the bridge with the surrounding environment, providing some architectural treatment so that it really doesn't stand out and kind of blends with the urban environment. The next slide. So that was, in the previous slide is what I talked about, the concept refinements for the three bridge options. I'll talk here a little bit more about the design feasibilities of these options. The first thing to note is we just want to point out there is that these bridges need to comply with the requirements for AASHTO LRFD guide specification for design of pedestrian bridges, as well as some parts of our AASHTO LRFD bridge design specification. For the bridge's inspection frequency, it really depends on the type of the structure. And I've put out there is a fracture critical bridge. Essentially, an example of that would be a truss or a steel two girder systems, which has a fracture critical member. And these structures would need to be inspected twice as often as structures without them. So we would consider precluding use of these kind of fracture critical members. And I bring that as because of the applicant's bridge is 6 foot wide, it would potentially have two girders. So trying to avoid having that situation just based on a past experience. I was working on a bridge at Appalachian Trail in Roanoke, and VDOT had specifically told us to preclude use of a two girder system bridge on that. The next was a bridge maintenance. I think that plays a lot of importance in it in terms of the cost based on the materials that is used for the bridges. For example, a structural steel girder would require regular painting, as well as the bridge joints. Like there are two span. There is a pier in the median for the bridge. There are joints all over and at the ramp as well. So they would be maintained regularly. That kind of adds to the cost as well. In terms of traffic impacts, a bridge construction with a median in between the piers on the ramps, traffic will likely have been impacted in Wiehle Avenue during the bridge construction. I had earlier mentioned about a retaining wall that is at the west side of the Wiehle Avenue. And also the way the ramp is, if you remember from the thumbnail, the ramp is at the sidewalk that's there on Wiehle Avenue. So that's going to impact because the footings and the piers of the ramp are essentially where the sidewalk is. So after the bridge is said and done, there would really no sidewalk left for pedestrian to access because of the bridge piers. Next slide, please. Yeah. So for the bridge foundations, there was no geotechnical report that was available for assessment. But a bridge structure will likely have shallow foundations, essentially spread footers, or deep foundations that would be piles that would be excavated deep under the columns and under the piers for the bridge. The auto crash protection, I think that brings us back to the same topic about having an adequate length of a crash-worthy ground-mounted pier protection barrier that can be placed, because these piers are very close to the intersection. So there is essentially not enough space to put this kind of barrier and effectively protect the pier from vehicle collision. And the same thing goes for the elevator and the stair towers as well. They're very close to the travel lanes on Wiehle Avenue, and they need to be adequately protected. The auto crash protection on the bridge option C is the one that we would have to place a protection barrier all along elevation C, along Wiehle Avenue for the bridge option C. Next slide, please. So this was one of the things that's the site distance that I wanted to mention previously as well, but here there is a better picture for it. Essentially, a bridge will act as an obstruction for people who are driving on Wiehle Avenue towards the intersection. And that's why the site distance would need to be evaluated so people can have a look at the traffic signals and the patterns well in advance before reaching the intersection. And if the site distance is found inadequate because of this obstruction, they need to be relocated. Along with that, there is the northeast pole that has a long arm that extends across the toll road, access road. That would be in conflict whenever there is going to be either the bridge in option A and B or the elevator tower as well. So they would need to be relocated. The other utility considerations that we looked at for these three bridge options was, as you can see in the picture, there's one of the light poles, but there are several other light poles as you go south on Wiehle Avenue, and this is to the west, that they would need to be relocated during the construction of the bridge and the bridge ramps. And along with that, there would be some electrical junction boxes, which is on the east of Wiehle Avenue, that are right at that intersection. So as soon as we try to relocate these elevators or the stair towers further away from the traffic, those might conflict with the junction boxes for the option A and B. Next slide. So that was what we had we developed for the crossing refinements, as well as the design, feasibility, and utility considerations for the three applicants' bridge options. And this is the tunnel option that STV developed that is under Wiehle Avenue and goes east to west. This is a sketch. At the top, you can see a longitudinal section. It is essentially going east and west under Wiehle Avenue for a length of 155 feet. This was the shortest length across Wiehle Avenue. And as you can see, this is going to be 14-foot clear width, similar to the width of the pedestrian bridge that we mentioned or recommended in the refinements. It will have an 8-foot minimum vertical distance inside the tunnel. And as you can see in this picture, it's going through 2 retaining walls. On the east, there is an MSC wall, and on the west, there is a cantilever concrete retaining wall. We might come back to this slide as we talk about the other, but let's move ahead to the slide 41, please. These were some precedent examples. We kind of wanted to show you that these are in Georgia and Pennsylvania. These are similar kind of structures. They were constructed under a live railroad track. We have a live road, so something similar. These are also subgrade. It would probably need a ramp or a stair going up. It would look something like this with as fancy as you can make it, but you could have like a brick facade. You could just have a regular concrete finishing inside. But these are just examples to kind of give an idea of how the tunnel would look. Slide 42. So we looked at the design feasibility for this, and we were looking at how can this tunnel be constructed. So one of the methods would be using a cut and cover, essentially, take off take off part of the Wiehle Avenue in stages, and then put in the tunnel. The other one would be hand mining technique, so that you could pretty much work from the east or the west without affecting basically underneath Wiehle Avenue. Now, the issue, the design feasibility aspect of a cut and cover is that the traffic on Wiehle Avenue would have to be either staged or would have to be detoured during the placement of the tunnel. The advantage of the hand mining technique, if you'd say, is that for the most part, it can be performed without disrupting the traffic. We would have to maintain a minimum of a 5-foot soil fill above the top of the tunnel, and the construction can go on of the tunnel. However, I wanted to point out one thing is that on the east side, because it goes through, it would pass through a retaining wall, which is an MSC retaining wall. It would need to be supported during construction. So there is a chance of a little bit of traffic getting affected on the northbound while we are working on that portal, on the east portal of the tunnel. Next slide. And I think for this slide, I think I'll go back to our tunnel sketch. Yeah, so essentially on the east side is this retaining wall, which is an MSC retaining wall. And as I mentioned, the MSC retaining wall essentially has wall panels as well as reinforced earth. Like there are some straps, reinforcing strap that goes from the panel, from the wall inside the road embankment. And they need to be taken off and put back once the tunnel is in place. And on the west side, for most part, there would be a hole that needs to be punched through this wall, and it would need to be reconstructed, or part of it might need to be reconstructed. And the other thing to note over here is when we looked at the elevations, this tunnel was essentially the east and the west portal will open into the existing parking lots on both the sides. What we found is that on the east side, the existing pavement of the parking lot would probably match with the walking surface of the tunnel. So pedestrians can just walk straight out or walk straight inside the tunnel on the east. However, on the west, there is a great elevation difference between the pavement for the retaining wall as well as the walking surface of the tunnel. And it would need a ramp that would lead you to the parking lot. And with a ramp, when you put in a ramp, there would probably be a retaining wall to support the existing parking lot as well as a pedestrian railing. I think we can go on slide 44. So with the tunnel options, there are also utility conflicts. We definitely identified two 15-inch reinforced concrete pipes under Wiehle Avenue that would have to be relocated when the tunnel is put in. There is a drainage inlet and associated pipes right in the median where the tunnel would pass. So those either need to be abandoned or relocated. And there are several light poles on the retaining wall of the east, which would be in conflict during the placement of the tunnel. So essentially, they can be taken out at the construction and put back in on the top of the retaining wall once it is put back after the east portal is completed. Next slide. And this is where we actually were done with our assessments, and now we get into the cost estimate. These are really high-level, rough order of magnitude cost that we developed for these options for design, construction, and also construction inspection. It compares the amount of investment that is required for each. I'm going to let Cullen take over for the next slide.
Great, thank you, Sagar. So yeah, basically Fair and Peers and STV split up the cost estimates. We do a lot of work related to traffic engineering, so we handled the cost estimates for the at-grade crossings, which I'll talk through here in just a second, and then Sagar will explain, pardon me, the cost estimates that were developed for the various bridge crossings and for the tunnel as well. What you can see here, essentially the crossing cost estimate is broken down into two categories: the category to design the thing and to plan it, and then also to build it. And what you see is that the crossing units here, of course in thousands, they'll be consistent through across these slides, relatively minor to do the intersection, because it essentially amounts to a little bit of modification of the existing median out there, adding some traffic pedestrian signal heads, the things that tell you how long you have to cross and when you can cross and not, the intersection to the existing poles that are out there. But that's about it. So reasonably low cost there. In the mid-block the lion's share of that construction cost comes from getting a new traffic signal. Those tend to be fairly pricey, and adding it to that mid-block section there. And because this crossing would require additional modification to the median, adding in new pavement markings, adding in new curb ramps, it's got a higher planning and design cost to it versus an intersection which is by and large already using existing infrastructure. So as I mentioned, I'll pass it back to Sagar to talk through the cost estimates for the bridges and then the tunnels.
Thanks, Cullen. Yes, for the bridge options as well as for, let's talk about the bridge options here. We developed two cost estimates. One was for the applicant's concept. The other was a refined concept. Essentially, the difference between them is the 6-foot wide bridge versus a 14-foot wide bridge. And we broke the cost estimates into these three the cost into these three components. One was what would be required to construct it, the preliminary engineering, how much it would require to design it, and then the construction engineering and inspection is essentially the cost it would be incurred during the construction for the oversight of the construction, making sure that the materials and is according to the plans and specification. And as you can see, the bridge option A, it comes to around 6 million for the applicant's concept. For the refined concept, it is 8.8. The applicant's bridge option B is 6.4. The refined concept is 7.3. The applicant concept for C is 4. And the refined concept is 6.5. It's additionally like a 30% increase in the option A and C. In terms of the applicants and the refined concepts, when you take into account, the width, the piers along the ramps, and the sizes of the piers that would change, number of girders that could change based on because of the difference in the width. Next slide. And this was a tunnel option. So we cost a tunnel option considering a hand mining technique and not cut and cover, making sure because we wanted to have no impacts or reduce impacts to the traffic on the Wiehle Avenue. So for a tunnel option, it would be somewhere in the range of 9.25 million. And that again includes the same construction, preliminary engineering, construction inspection. I do want to note that these costs for the bridge as well as for the tunnel does not include any cost for that would incur in utility relocation, as well as the preventive maintenance, future preventive maintenance and inspections that would be needed on this bridge and tunnel periodically. I think the next slide kind of summarizes all our cost estimate, Fair and Peers and ours, kind of shows you in a glance that the intersection is, at the cheapest, and as you kind of go with the bridge option and the tunnel being at $9.25 million. So just at a glance, I think that's what I had in terms of our assessments. I'll pass it on to Mark for concluding.
All right. Well, thank you very much to both of you for very detailed presentations. I think what we'd like to do now is go ahead and open it up for some questions. I know that we've been able to do this previously, sort of one at a time. So Lori or Rob, I don't know if you have a thought on the best way to just kind of go in order, but I think that's been working very well. If that works for you.
Yeah.
I think it works. I actually think I will go first. I wrote some notes as you gentlemen were talking, and so on page 30, if you don't mind, I had a question. There you go. Applicant bridges are 3 foot, and then it says, oh, recommended adding an additional 3 foot extensions, so it would be a total of 6'6" tall. Is that what that means, supposed to mean?
No, I think not an additional 6 foot. What it actually means is the applicant has a 3 foot high pedestrian railing, but that goes on the ramps, stairs, and also across the bridge. What we are recommending is that on the ramps and the stairs, generally a pedestrian railing is 3'6" tall. So on the ramps and the stairs, provide a 3'6" tall railing, but on the bridge and only on the bridge, have a handrail as well as a pedestrian fencing. The pedestrian fencing normally depending on whether you use like the top curved or whether you use like a straight, it would be like a 7 to 8 foot tall pedestrian fencing, but that will only be on the bridge. But on the ramps and on the stairs, it would still be 3'6" tall pedestrian railing.
But did the applicant's bridge not have fencing on the bridge?
Correct.
Really?
Yeah, so they had at least the elevations that were provided to us. It just had pedestrian 3 foot high pedestrian railing that goes all along, even on the bridge. It did not show any fencing on it.
Oh, okay. On the next slide, 31. And your lighting that is you're thinking of here, is this something that is additional, or is it are the lamps that are currently there in that area not enough, or is this just to enhance lighting?
Lori, this would be lighting on the actual crossing. So it would be while you're walking across. So there's no crossing there today. So there's a question of when you're actually up on the overpass, how would that be lit? And so the lighting at the ground level wouldn't reach whatever 23 feet into the air to illuminate your path up on the overpass. So we need to provide some sort of lighting on the overpass.
I guess the question is, is the applicant's is the proposed bridge that was in the proposed, is it even to code? I mean, wouldn't lighting and the size of the fencing on the side be something that is required? I mean, not just concept refinements, they are, you wouldn't want somebody to cross a bridge without light, and you wouldn't want somebody to not have fencing over a busy street?
That's a very good question. So what STV has done is taken an initial review and identified these issues. That doesn't necessarily mean that those issues could not be resolved through the further refinement of TF Cornerstone's plans. However, one of the things that we saw was that through some of the options requiring meeting those requirements would require possibly some relocations of abutments and barriers and other things. And so the extent to which that would be necessary might impact the feasibility of the crossing options. So I know that's a long answer, but effectively, I think we're not sure because we haven't had the opportunity to work with them to identify what might be resolvable here.
Okay, so you don't know. That's what you're trying to tell me, which is fine.
Yeah, we wanted the group to have a complete picture of what would be needed to make this work, and we've identified some of these deficiencies.
Yeah, and it is, I'm assuming that some of these refinements are much more than refinements. They would be requirements of building a bridge. But let's go to 35, page 35 for a second. You were speaking about inspections, and what a need for an inspection would be twice as often as structures without this critical infrastructure, without this two girder system. I don't know how often a basic structure is evaluated. Is that like twice a year? Is that?
I'm going to turn that over to Sagar to speak to this.
So most of the highway bridges are inspected once every 2 years, but it also depends on. Essentially the highway bridges would be inspected once every 2 years.
And who normally does those inspections? Would that be like FDOT, or is that something we have to then contract with you to come back and do?
This is Tom Bishotti. Maybe I can take that question. Part of who does the inspection on the bridge will depend on who ultimately is maintaining the bridge, whether that's VDOT, whether that's the county, whether that's a private company. If it were to come to the county, and probably if it were to go to VDOT, we would hire a separate contractor to do those inspections.
Okay, thank you, Tom. I have one last question on page 36. So this was interesting, Sagar. I didn't quite understand this. Does this mean that these bridges cannot even be built because you cannot put the crash protection in because they are, as they're modeled, too close to, there's not enough room to put these crash protections in? Or are crash protections optional?
I think Sagar can take that one as well.
So the crash protection, you would have to design it for a crash collision. But as soon as Derek, feel free to chime in if you have something to add. But they can be designed for collision. However, in most of the cases, the sizes of these piers and everything would be would start getting bigger. The reinforcements start getting, it's like a spiraling effect that the design would have on as soon as you start bulking it up to take the impact. And the most of the times I have seen is providing a pier protection barrier in front of these piers, like at least on the highway or with the traffic with the high speed. Derek, do you have something to add to that?
Yeah, I'll just add, with that center piers being located so close to the intersection, it would be almost impossible to protect that pier adequately to protect the traveling public from the object that would exist in the median. The other option is, as Sagar was kind of alluding to, is to eliminate the actual pier and try to span that entire width across Wiehle Avenue. But as you do that, of course, the structure, all the members, everything like that get a lot larger. The structure depth probably gets deeper, and you're fighting the grade with the ramps and everything that are leading into it. If that makes sense.
I don't know enough about it to make sense, but I guess I'm just, so you either have to span the road and then have sufficient crash barriers on the sides, or you have a piling that comes down in the center, and then you're not sure whether or not it's even feasible to have those crash barriers there, and then also on the sides near the elevator and the stairs. So
and I think our concept refinement was actually to recommend relocating the bridges further south on Wiehle Avenue so we could accommodate the pier protection system and the guardrail and the guardrail end treatment.
Okay. Okay. That's really what I had in terms of questions. I'm ready to take other people's questions.
So Lori, there's a few people with their hands raised in the chat. Maurice has had his hand up as the first hand holder, so I think we should go to Maurice.
Okay, Maurice.
First question is for Colin. In your walk shed study for the at-grade crossing, did you incorporate the approximate 30-foot grade differential between the existing parking lot at Campus Commons and Wiehle Avenue above it, which would require approximately 60 steps going up the pocket park that Tia Cornerstone envisioned, as well as an alternate back path? It's going to take people quite a while to get up that grade. Was that incorporated in your study, your walk shed study, which showed pretty good crossing time for the at-grade crossing?
Yeah, thanks, Maurice. That was included. So essentially for paths that involved an elevation change, we calculated a different walking time. So basically the amount of time you need to go up the stairs, we kind of multiplied it by the number of stairs at the approximate distance. So the travel times that you see do take into consideration elevation change, as well as things like waiting for escalators and traffic signals.
Great, thank you. My second question on the so-called tunnel option, I prefer the word underpass, the underpass option. There was reference to cut and cover, but the only numbers shown us tonight were for the boring. Is that because cut and cover is viewed too disruptive to traffic on Wiehle that you can't even give us a number? But having said that, if you were to disrupt traffic, how much less expensive would cut and cover be than the option you showed us tonight, which is to bore a hole under Wiehle Avenue?
All right, so I'll start with the first part of your question, and then I'll turn it over to STV, who might be able to speak in general terms to the second part. In terms of,
Before you start, can the slide on cost be brought up, page 50, please? And then Mark, you go ahead.
Okay, wait till we get that up. So to answer the first part of your question, yes, a cut and cover option, which for those who don't know would mean essentially digging out a hole and then covering it up. Based on this situation and the importance of Wiehle Avenue, both in terms of access to the Dulles Toll Road and access over the Dulles Toll Road. We considered it and felt that the impacts to traffic would be too great. It wouldn't just impact traffic on Wiehle Avenue, it would impact traffic patterns on the Dulles Toll Road. It would impact how people could get to and from their homes. What we would have to do would be to close either all of Wiehle Avenue or half of Wiehle Avenue at a time for an extended period. And given the critical importance of that as a transportation corridor, that didn't seem feasible. The other piece of that equation, though, was something you mentioned in your first question, was based on the grade differential, because we wouldn't have to dig down to bore, that actually had a positive impact on the overall cost. But I'll turn it over to STV to speak a little bit more to the cost aspect of relative costs between cut and cover and the option that they estimated here.
So yes, the cut and cover would cost considerably cheaper than the hand mining. Hand mining would be the expensive option with all the design and detailing that goes into it. In terms of how much cheaper it would be, I don't have a percentage or a number to share right now. Unless Derek, do you kind of have an estimate of what that would be?
No, I mean, that would be something that we would have to look into and
Right.
we develop the cost estimate for the for that option, and then factor in all the traffic, either shifting or detouring thereof of traffic in that estimate.
Yeah, unfortunately, the challenges of closing Wiehle Avenue probably make that unrealistic. But anyway, hopefully that provides an answer to your question overall.
Well, it just like to comment. I'm not an engineer, so I'm probably speaking out of school here, but I've seen it done in other situations where you've got lots of lanes of traffic, and you can constrict and close only, say, the northbound side of Wiehle Avenue would be closed. The southbound side plus the median would be engineered in such a way you could have maybe 2 lanes traveling in each direction with some kind of a temporary barrier. Look what they did at the Memorial Bridge in Washington. They closed that one way entirely and then kept it open the other way. And that's a vital bridge. It's more vital to the traffic in our region than the Wiehle Avenue is. So, I mean, I think you could probably figure out a way to make traffic flow reasonably well through that space by closing one half of the existing Wiehle Avenue at a time, using also the medians, grade that down, make that part of the plan. That's just my thought as a observer and not an engineer. I think that pretty much covers my questions. I would say this. I would say that option C, bridge option C, if what we heard tonight is gospel, that should be dropped immediately, because you cannot do without the sidewalk on the west side of Wiehle Avenue. If that's going to be compromised by the ramp, that's true. We should dispense with option C now, not even consider it. That's my thought. I'm finished. Thank you.
Thank you, Maurice.
Thank you.
Can we go on to Tammy Petrini?
Yes, Tammy.
Thank you. Wow, I have one comment for Colin. Not everybody wants to go to the metro, down to the escalator and get up into the metro. So I appreciate, and I'm so glad you taught us about this time shed. So kudos on that. But we have been trapped by people thinking that people only want to go to the metro. They do not. They want to get north. They may want to go to metro, but that's a huge thing. The second thing, my observation, if I heard correctly, is this is the danger of proffers being given fast and dirty at a application approval meeting in front of the Board of Supervisors when the specifics are not lined up. TF Cornerstones has proffered to do A, B, or C, and will give 1.5 million for an underpass. Well, if I heard correctly, A, B, or C, as they proffered, unless they've got some tricky language in that, none of them are viable because of the constrictions of being too close to travel lanes. The elevators couldn't be there. The site plan, the site view of turning vehicles is compromised. We would have to have all of these refinements that Cigar has mentioned. And, you know, I'm just thinking, bless Maurice for saying, cut out number C. Well, I think you can cut them all out as proffered. So I think we're back to the drawing board. If none of what they proffered can be built because of regulations, I don't see where we go. One last technical question on the underpass. It was mentioned that on the west side, the elevation is not the same as grade. Is it lower or higher? Does it need a ramp up or a ramp down? And could the tunnel itself be sloped to accommodate for that grade change? Thank you.
Hi, Tammy. This is Mark. I'll actually say on the first point about the destinations, you can hang that one on me. The reason that we use the Metro to the Sunrise Valley Campus Commons intersection wasn't so much to say that everybody's going between those two places. It was mostly to pick two destinations that weren't immediately at the intersection. Obviously, there could be additional analysis, but effectively, we're looking at where the bulk of the pedestrian traffic would come from, and based on Theron Pierce's analysis of the times, if you were on the bridge, on the Wiehle Avenue Bridge, it's going to be faster to walk down the Sunrise Valley Drive than to cut through the neighborhood. So if you're on the west side, coming from the new building at Reston Station at the corner of Wiehle Avenue and walking south, you're going to be better off staying on the west side of the street. That said, we also looked at the likely destination of a lot of people that might be using a crossing in this location, and between the Campus Commons development, the other office park to the east of Campus Commons, along Campus Commons Drive. It seemed like there would be a lot of demand, not all of the demand, but a lot of the demand would be going from the area between Sunrise Valley Drive and the toll road across Wiehle Avenue to the metro station area. So we thought that was a good example. On your third point, this slide is up here. We actually did work to angle the tunnel upward a little bit as it goes across, but the Commerce Metro Center property, while it is below the grade of the street, it's also above the grade of the tunnel coming up from such a low point on the Campus Commons side. So you'd have to come up from the tunnel to the Commerce Metro Center site and then continue upward back to the street. Colin, I don't know, or Cigar, I don't know if you want to touch.
Okay, so Mark, if I can interrupt you, the ramp shown on the diagram on page 40 is on the west side.
Correct.
Correct. Thank you.
You're welcome.
And the other point I want to make on the tunnel, I think we need to focus on what we've heard today and what we've learned about the requirements for bridges and safety and sight lines, etc. But as far as an underpass is concerned, we're not thinking 8 feet and we're not thinking this width. We need to have bicycles and pedestrians going both ways in that tunnel at the same time. very important for this community to have bicycle and pedestrian access to anything that's planned. So I don't know how a 6-foot bridge ever was even in the vocabulary of the TF Cornerstone. Thank you.
Thank you, Tammy. How about we go to Steve Cherney and then we have Bruce Wright on deck.
Okay, thanks, Rob. I just have 2 quick questions. And I think the first one is, perhaps they're both directed to Sagar and his team, would be, I don't know if you mentioned, Sagar, just how far south of the ramps, the highway ramps, the A and B bridge options would need to be pushed from their current proposed location.
Sagar or Derek,
Yeah.
can you speak?
So you are talking about relocating the bridge further south on Wiehle Avenue and how far it should be from the intersection. So the picture that I had up for the pier protection, I don't remember the slide number, but yeah. So as you can see that from the edge of the pier protection kind of goes, a certain length, and that is depending on the speed and all that. It's either a 30-foot or a 35-foot on each side of that pier face, and then of course there is a guardrail connection to it too. So I think it would have to shift at least at a minimum that many feet off to be able to place that pier protection, and then also an impact attenuator in front of it to make sure that it's adequately protected.
Okay, thanks. And then my second question is, so the tunnel estimate does not include utility relocation?
Correct.
Right. Do you have any sense of how much that could add to the cost? Would it be in the millions, I would assume?
I don't exactly have a number, how much in a ballpark that it would cost. It just kind of, with the limited information that we had, we really don't know how deep those utilities are. I also don't know how long they run along Wiehle Avenue, and at what could be a good point to actually relocate them, and if they have to go through a different alignment, where it would be. So that, yeah, I do not have a ballpark or any number for that utility relocations.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks, Stephen. How about Bruce Wright, and then Miss Quinn, we'll have you on deck.
Yeah, hi, thanks, Rob. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, great. Yeah, Steve got to one of the questions I had about the utility relocation, and I would think that would be pretty costly, and it seems like it's hard to move forward with the decision without knowing that, at least a ballpark estimate. I got a question, or not really a question, a comment about slide 34, where there's a recommendation for a metal bollard in the bridge. And as a cyclist, those can be very dangerous, and we've advocated not to have those on bridges. I know the Park Authority will sometimes put them up despite our protests, but that's not something we would like to see. I don't think there'll be a huge problem with motorists using these bridges, but anyway, that's a minor point. And back to the cost, is it correct to assume that the county will be responsible for the costs above? No, okay, if the applicant builds the bridge, the applicant pays the full cost, is that correct?
That would be correct. If the applicant builds a bridge as per the proffers, they would be responsible for all costs involved.
All right. What about if there's a tunnel? Is the applicant obligated to build that, or is it only contribute 1.5 million, as Tammy had said?
If we select, if the study group selects any option that they recommend to the board, and the board moves forward with any option that is not bridge option A, bridge option B, or bridge option C, the applicant will provide a contribution of $1.65 million, and the county can do whatever it feels is appropriate with that to improve a crossing at this location.
Okay.
And so this is actually a good question, because it's a good opportunity to remind everybody that the way the proffers are worded is that the applicant will provide one of the three bridge options or $1.65 million for the county to improve the crossing, which could be a different overpass, underpass, improvements to at grade, whatever makes the most sense. I also want to note, in regard to the utility question, a utility survey would be needed in order to reach that level of information, which we would view later in a design process, that unfortunately wouldn't be part of this process. That the challenge with this corridor, both along the toll road and Sunrise Valley Drive, is that there is a lot of utilities. There are some utilities that are, go to data centers and all of that kind of stuff, and it's not always easy to find all of that without a full survey. And so unfortunately, that's not feasible at this time. In terms of the bollard, you're right. The designs here probably wouldn't call for that, but we would have to make sure that it's not, depending on the bridge option, it's not in a location where a car could inadvertently drive onto the bridge.
Okay. Regarding the cost of the bridges, these costs are with the recommendations of the consultant. Is the applicant obligated to accept those recommendations, or can they build what they had initially proposed?
The applicant would have to get approval from the county, from the Virginia Department of Transportation, and in this case, likely from the Metropolitan Washington Airports Authority, due to the proximity to the Dulles Toll Road. And so the most, I'd say, of those three, the most critical piece of this was a lot of what Sagar touched on, which is these VDOT standards. Mm-hmm. The VDOT is not going to allow something to be built in a public right-of-way that doesn't meet their standards. And a lot of these things, like the crash barriers and the width requirements, will be necessary. We'd also have to look at these things, for ADA and everything else like that. And so there's county requirements to that end as well. And then of course we'd want this to be, to meet the comprehensive plan, all of the various county requirements and standards. So there would be a lot that would have to happen between here and building. They cannot just go build.
All right, one last comment. Well, actually, two quick ones. I really do like the at-grade crossing. It's so much simpler, and there would be money to maybe improve Wiehle Avenue and improve the crossing. Regarding the hawk signal, it seems like a two-phase hawk signal might work, but the problem with that is that we don't have experience with it. I've seen it work in Tucson. They're everywhere, and they work really well because motorists actually stop. I think there would be a learning curve, but I think it could work there mid-block. We've seen that people do want to go mid-block and then cut through the property, but then whether they can do that in the future will depend on whether Comstock will allow or will provide for that kind of a cut through in their property. That's all I've got. Thank you.
Thank you, Bruce.
Yep.
Ms. Quinn?
Can you hear me? Yeah. Hi, this is Fadula. I have a comment I want to make before I ask my little questions. When we were talking, and I know we're not talking about closing Wiehle, but when we were talking about it in the cut and fill option, it was being talked about in terms of its impact on traffic. Wiehle is a critical element of the walking and biking network. The next place to cross the Dulles Access Road is Reston Parkway, and it's a 3 or 4 mile detour for people on foot or bike if that ever closes. So they are impacted even more. So I just wanted to say that. I have a couple of questions because I'm not clear on these points, and then they relate to what I saw. are the elevators going to be operated 24 hours a day? And we have experience elsewhere in the county where in a similar situation they weren't. So that is critical to when you show the walk sheds. There's a difference if some of those walk sheds are out of operation for part of the day, and shouldn't that be clarified? So that's one thing. The pedestrian crossing, will that be there in advance of any of these options? I had heard something in the last monthly meeting where that was mentioned. This will go, the pedestrian crossing will go in at that new location while we're waiting for those alternatives. Is that correct?
So the crosswalk can go in earlier than the other alternatives. It would be in accordance with the proffers, and the at-grade crossing has an earlier trigger than the bridge options or the contribution. So yes.
Okay, so then in the analysis of the site distance issues for the bridge piers, I didn't hear anything about the impact of the bridge piers on that pedestrian. We heard it in terms of the impact on the visibility of the signal heads and stuff like that, but wouldn't there also be potential sightline problems for the crossing? So that was one. I was a little bit unclear in the tunnel option for the ramp, where it showed the ramp on the west side. I was unclear where the existing sidewalk was in that diagram. Was it up at the road level? Was it, where had that?
So while they're finding that, are you talking about the overpass option or the tunnel, tunnel option?
No, this is the, I was unclear, showing the existing sidewalk.
Between where it says Wiehle Avenue southbound and the ramp. So this would have to either go past there, or the sidewalk could go around the ramp. That would be to be determined with design of the underpass. As to your question about site distance, that's a very good point. Site distance is not just a question of vehicles. When there's pedestrians and crosswalks, that is taken into consideration when evaluating site distance. So obviously, if there were large piers and right at the corner, that would impact the ability of vehicles to see pedestrians and pedestrians to see vehicles, and we'd have to work to identify a way to resolve that issue. That was part of the reason why it was recommended that the piers, that the whole structure be moved further south. But if it was built at the corner, we would have to make sure to resolve that issue. Absolutely.
Yeah. And we heard about the impact of Bridge C on the sidewalk on the west side of Wiehle, but I couldn't hear what the impact of the tunnel was on the sidewalk. Now you've said it might have to go around, but that's a whole big thing to have to go around this ramp, and how they would connect back with each other. And would you be going way out of your way if you're going in one direction just to access that ramp from the sidewalk and all that stuff? I have another comment, which is, and it's really, it's sort of something that sort of got, that became very clear in the analysis at the end about the costs of doing the design and planning work, which was the extraordinarily low cost of the grade crossing in comparison to these other options. And it's really not for tonight, but I just wanted to point that out as really kind of, to me, a red flag that, you know, the proposal for the pedestrian crossing is really just layered upon the existing geometry that's already there, and it's not really doing a lot to improve the geometry for the sake of the pedestrians. And if money is willing to be spent on these other options, and like large sums of money on, you know, other ways of crossing the street, couldn't more be dedicated to improving the geometry for that pedestrian crossing. The pedestrian crossing they're showing isn't the only way to lay that out in that location. Like right now, pedestrians, it's a long crossing. They're pretty exposed. There's big turning there's big radii at each side. You know, there's a lot more that could be looked at, and I just thought that really, you know, was obvious in the design costs. But anyway, that's all my comments. Oh well, I did actually want to echo what Bruce said about the bollard. I also wasn't a fan. I wasn't going to bring that up, but cyclists really don't like that bollard idea. The trailing cyclist, it's not the first cyclist, it's the second cyclist who can't see the bollard and they go crashing into it, and it can be very problematic. And it disturbs the route of the cyclist. It's much more controlling of where they will be in the space by putting that there.
All right, thank you.
Thank you for
Scott Leary. Scott, we can't hear you.
Yeah, I'm here.
There you go.
How are y'all? Couple of quick thoughts here. As most know, I've been pretty much a proponent of a well-designed at-grade crossing in the absence of the knowledge that I've gained tonight. Comprehending that this is not intended to supplant the existing or even deviate traffic, pedestrian bicycle traffic, from the existing east-west crossing of Sunrise Valley, or of Wiehle at Sunrise Valley. The only real option, given the master plan considerations, is the underpass. And I would say that cost be damned. I understand. I'm consulting to a DOT right now, so I understand what that implicates. So the question I would have of the developer is, we are aware that you have contributed or committed to 1.5 million if we don't choose one of the 3 proffered bridge options. Is there any way you would come up to even the average cost of the bridge options as a contribution to an underpass?
So Scott, I don't believe we have. Well, I know the applicant himself is not on the phone tonight because I know he was under the weather, but so that might be.
You can always ask.
Yeah, we can reach out if nobody from the
Ken is on the phone, and so is Brian.
It's not something that has to be answered right now. I think it's a fair question to ask now that we have the magnitude costs of what the bridge is going to cost them in each of its iterations. I think it's a fair question to ask. Are you willing to now say, hey, we'll take the midpoint and contribute back? Other than that, I still advocate for a well-designed at-grade crossing because that's going to exist, regardless of what we choose. That is going to exist, so that needs to be well-designed. Tammy's comment from last meeting about moving it south a little bit away from the actual toll road ramps, to me, raised a very good point. I have one final point, and I am down here in Florida, in District 1. Florida leads the league in pedestrian and bicycle fatalities. District 1 leads Florida in bicycle and pedestrian fatalities. So there's an awful push to change that. With regard to the Hawk, I've seen them work. I do not believe this would be a good location for it. And that is simply because of the grade of Wiehle Avenue. You would have people making a right-hand turn off Sunrise Valley to go north and accelerating because of a hill. And because it's pedestrian activated, it's a completely uncoordinated signal within that 900 to 1,000 feet before the signal at the toll road ramps. That's all I got.
All right. Thank you, Scott. I don't see anybody else's hand up at the moment. I did want to just give a few comments of mine, and Lori, I see your hand waving, so I'll come back. I do just want to comment a little bit. Sagar, Derek, and Colin, I really appreciate the content tonight. This was very helpful in many ways. The deeper dive you've taken into the the concepts, and you're finding some things that hadn't been picked up yet on the real viability of some of the concepts. And granted, they were just concepts. I mean, it was a zoning application. It wasn't a final construction plan. So we can give the applicant a little bit of the benefit of the doubt, and there'd be a lot of refinements, of course, but we will have to address the differences between what's a desirable crossing versus what maybe was on the previous concepts. But certainly the cost, we've all been waiting for the cost, just order of magnitude, if nothing else, just to try to have a better understanding of what we're talking about, how we march forward, and how that kind of informs us all in terms of our thinking. That's going to be very, very helpful. So I thank you all for that, and certainly your experience came across tonight. So I'm glad that the county chose to bring you guys on board, and thank you again for your efforts. So with that, Lori.
Thank you. I had a couple questions as I heard people talk, which was interesting. Thank you all for questions that were really thoughtful. The first one had to do with, I know you can't say how much the utilities will cost, but in your experience as having built these types of things, you could say, it's in a range, it's 10 to 40% of the overall cost, or you could give us some kind of range, or you could say it's between 3 and 5% of the overall cost. Whatever you've seen in your experience, that's what we're asking for. We're not asking for answers, but we don't even have any concept of when you say, oh, but it just doesn't include. Is that 50% cost sometimes? I guess I'm looking for just a little bit more guidance on that.
So, Lori, I'll start on that, and if STV has anything that they'd like to add, they can do so. Utility costs can frankly be all over the map, and it really has to do not with, while we're building a taller bridge, so there's more utility costs. There's some places where the utility costs might be extremely minimal because there's next to nothing there, and then there's other places where it's not just a question of the number of utilities, but when there are utilities, they have to be relocated, and sometimes relocating them can be a challenge because sometimes some utilities can be turned off temporarily. Sometimes there's backup systems. Sometimes they can't. But most critically, sometimes there's literally no place to put the utilities. I know we've had projects in Reston where we've had to relocate utilities and have gone in, VDOT's gone in, we've gone in to find that there's really not a lot of place to do it. And so to relocate one utility, we have to relocate other utilities, and it just balloons. So I don't know if STV has any sort of orders of magnitude that they can provide, but it just varies significantly by location. So.
Hey, Mark, this is Tom.
Mm-hmm.
Just to add on to what you said about the utilities, in particular, Sunrise Valley Drive has a substantial amount of underground fiber optic cables as well as other utilities. I couldn't tell you offhand how many of those actually are on Wiehle as well, but I wouldn't be surprised if there are quite a number of them down there. We haven't done a utility assessment. That wasn't part of what we were trying to accomplish with this study. But really, to be able to give you an accurate answer, we would have to have some indication of just how many utilities are underneath Wiehle. And as Mark said, even if you know that there's 10 of them there, you got to find places to put those 10. So it really is a pretty wide open
Tom, I'm just
problem.
confused because the Metro had to do that, right? So they had to go find out where everything was. And I mean, wouldn't they have that data as to where everything had been repositioned to? And
They would have it for what it was in probably 2012, but a lot probably has happened in the last 8 years. So whenever whoever would go ahead to do any of these overpass or underpass options, they would have to get a brand new utility designation because it's undoubtedly changed in the last 8 years.
okay, thank you.
And to Lori, if I may,
yeah.
To support Tom, the intensity of these utilities probably exists nowhere else in the country but perhaps north and south of San Francisco. When we were a partner with the county, we being Comstock, to develop the transportation facility north of the toll road at Wiehle Avenue and what is now Reston Station Boulevard, but south of Sunset Hills, when we went in to excavate what would be 1.5 million square feet underground, the utility relocation was, the effort was intense, and we had everyone from FEDA to FCDOT to the private developers working on that. The cost blew out our budget. The time involved blew out our budget. And these are numbers and circumstances that we prepare for, but there is no way to give you an estimate right now in October of 2020 that might even hold up when we get to the actual procedures in 2022, 2025. I mean, just trying to express how intangible a lot of these things are. That's all.
So that kind of leads into the next question, you know, doubling the width of the tunnel, which I would prefer to do. If you're going to build it right. You know, I guess when you look at costs, what's the cost of, you know, somebody's life? And so when I think about building a tunnel, you know, that how many people are going to safely pass over, you know, and not be hit by traffic? But that would also increase the, you know, the moving and the cost and everything. So I'm assuming it would at least double the cost. Would that be a fair thought, STP?
Sorry, Colin, can you go back to the cost estimate sheet? So the tunnel that we evaluated is it would be 14 feet wide.
14 feet
wide, not long. 14 feet. These are all widths.
So when you showed the pictures, they were only 8 foot wide, but these are 14. Okay.
So we did the cost estimate is for a 14-foot wide tunnel.
Got it. I'm sorry.
So that's why we went from, we wanted to provide, when we found that the overpasses need to be 14 feet wide, we wanted to provide apples to apples, as well as we recognize, given the length and use, that having a wider tunnel makes sense here. So it's a 14-foot wide.
Thank you. And then my last question was really Scott, because he was very anti-tunnel and then he switched. And I was wondering why.
Are you asking me, Lori?
Yes, I am.
Well, I didn't necessarily switch. finally gotten the answer, and it was thanks to Mark through the chat tonight, that it's anticipated that the existing and future pedestrian and bike traffic on Sunrise Valley will continue the at-grade crossing at Sunrise Valley and Wiehle Avenue. And therefore, this becomes a piece of a larger future movement. It's not intended to be that piece of infrastructure that takes people away from that at-grade crossing. So, given the other 4 options, 3 bridges or 3 overpasses, 1 underpass, this, by virtue of its mandatory location by grade and the rise on Wiehle Avenue, this becomes the most logical piece to fit with the overall master plan. And if that's the direction we're headed, that we're trying to build something that actually serves the public and fits the master plan, not just being dedicated to the future residents and employees at Campus Commons, that becomes the best piece. And well-designed, well-placed, as a future larger piece of the pedestrian and bicycle infrastructure network, the cost increases to me. I mean, I'm just looking at the numbers now. An additional $5 million is, quite frankly, Zippo in the long-term scheme for something that people would actually use. If you were to build an overpass and try to connect it to that master plan trail, that's never going to work. People aren't going to use it. So it's not so much that I changed. I got a little bit of clarity, and therefore I can fall in completely behind. I still think that at-grade crossing that is going to exist needs to be very well designed.
Hey, Lori, Rob, I think Connie has a hand up.
Oh, okay, I'm sorry.
Yeah,
Go
she
ahead,
does.
Tom.
All right, hi. It took me a while to find how to put my hand up. Just two quick things. If we could go to slide 32, and I appreciate listening to Scott on that. Perhaps the bridge options are going to be out, but I just wanted to have us all know the answer here. It's about the guardrails. And so I guess this may be a question for a cigar. If a bridge was going to be built and it had to have this pier in the middle, how long would those guardrails be, and are they essentially going to prevent anyone from crossing in the middle, which people are going to want to do? Maybe it's a safety thing to not allow it, but on the other hand, people will be frustrated in jumping over them. So I don't have to have an answer, but just think about, I don't know, those guardrails. I'm just wondering the length.
Connie?
Yes.
I may, we have evaluated at Comstock, we've evaluated a big bridge potential from Isaac Newton Square across Wiehle to come onto the western side of Wiehle. The railings, the side protection is an absolute must, and it does change the way that you design, implement, and it goes all the way down to the street level.
And just to be clear, I'm not talking about the things that keep people from throwing stuff off the bridge. I'm talking about the guardrails on the ground at street level. So is that what you're talking about?
No, I'm not. I was talking about all of the other pieces, and actually in this view, I think that the pieces we were looking at had to cover the down ramp. But no, I don't know about the guardrails at the bottom. We haven't gotten to that level. And again, we have invested at least $100,000 in looking at these options. And I can't answer your question about the security rails at the bottom.
Connie, are you talking about the crash barrier in the median?
Yes.
Yes, thank you.
Yes, I am. Yep. So there's
The crash barrier in the median or
if you
the
look at
guardrail on the sidewalk?
if you look at the white crash barrier, there's guardrail coming off of it, and I do believe that the structural engineer said those are required. Anyway, just something to think about. We don't spend a lot of time on it, but if you put up a bridge and you had to have that, you can also have a very long guardrail. And how much are people going to hate that? I just don't know.
I mean, that's a great question, and Sidewalk should answer.
Yeah. So, Cigar, can you speak to?
Yeah, so I don't know how much people are going to hate it because they're going to cross over it either ways, but because they're not that tall. However, they would be several hundred feet long, and pretty much it would be like if we move the bridge south of Wiehle Avenue, it would extend several hundred feet south as well. So there are different design standards for the guardrail with the different lengths and different considerations, but it won't be like a 10-foot or a 20-foot long guardrail.
And again, I assume the guardrails required, all these things that are required. I hope that somewhere in this process, there's a chance to go back to TF Cornerstones and renegotiate those proffers.
Connie, what I can say is that to get to this engineering drawing of the picture that you see on the screen, took huge effort. And again, this is constructed, but that ramp that you see from what we have investigated would never be allowed here in Fairfax County, and you would need to seize or advance that ramp at ADA standards for 4 times as long as what you see now.
Okay. One last thing real quickly. I know we're running out of time. It's on slide 44. Just any of the county people here on the call, is there anyone that I could follow up with to ask questions about this drainage inlet that you all know about? Just tell me who I can email later to ask drainage.
Connie, you're welcome to email me. I'll get you my information here, and I can work on getting you any answers to any questions you might have.
Thank you, Mark. That's all.
You know what? Jen had a question. Not really a question, but she was wondering if it sounds like when you have a bridge, it precludes having an at-grade crossing because the bridge in that location and a bridge for that location. So no site distance concern. But the site distance has to do with the bridge getting in the way of the cars seeing the stoplights, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's correct. The other piece of this though, it's not just about the site crossing Wiehle Avenue. There's still pedestrians that need to cross the toll road ramps. So we need to make sure that there's site distance for those people as well. And so so we would have to look at how and if an at-grade crossing and an overpass could be accommodated with consideration of the piers and everything else. But that would all have to be studied further. But that goes back to something STV said, which is that they'd really recommend that the bridge be relocated further south in order to accommodate a lot of these things. However, wherever it's located, we would still have those large piers coming up. And keep in mind, it's not just the piers; it would be on options A on the east side and A and B on both sides, an elevator bank and stairs. And so that's also a large object that would impact sight distance that we have to look at. So this is a great question that would all have to be taken into consideration as to whether it's as to feasibility.
Okay. So we have 6 minutes.
Lori, I have a comment.
Yes, sir.
Maurice, can you put up slide 40, please?
We're going to have another meeting on this, Maurice.
Okay, well, this will be very quick.
Okay.
If you look at, if I'm looking at this the way I believe it's designed, the question was asked, what about the ramp? Was that going to interfere with the sidewalk on the west side of Wiehle Avenue? You look at the grade, just if you see the vertical structure going up, that is a retaining wall, and the sidewalk is shown to the right of the retaining wall. So the sidewalk would not be affected by the ramp. The ramp is coming farther west and then coming up. The sidewalk, the existing sidewalk on Wiehle Avenue is not affected if I'm looking at this the way I think it was intended. Is that right, Mark?
That's correct. This is just a concept though, so we would look at this further, but as this is shown, that's correct.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Awesome. Wow. A lot of information, a lot of great questions, really, really thoughtful information and a lot of work. Jose, can you take this off the screen and just take us back to panel view? I just want to say goodbye and let Rob wrap us up. We have a meeting on the 19th of November.
Yeah.
And I'm hoping to set you all before that meeting and try and flush out where we're going to end up on this and get a real feeling of what your choice is in terms of preference and why. So there's a lot of reading. If you didn't get the first presentation, reach out to Jose so that he can get that to you as well, so you can read it. And next week, I'm going to send you, after I get it through Rob and Jose, and they okay it, just a little bit of a homework so that you can sort of grab your thoughts and organize so you can share them with us at the next meeting. Come to hopefully a consensus on, you know, do we move forward? What do we move forward? What do we do, Walter? You know, what do we think we should recommend and why? And really put some meat on it. But you guys have been phenomenal, and it's been just very impressive to work with such a great team.
Hey Lori, before we go, I just want to touch on something really quickly. I know that we've had some questions about this. Okay, I'm going to be quick. Scott actually reminded me of this, which is that this process is what we're calling phase 1, which is a study of the crossing at this location. In the future, and this is not funded currently, we hope to have it funded soon, but we would need to look at how traffic is impacted once Metro phase 2 opens. We do want to study the entire corridor from Sunrise Valley to the WOD Trail. And at that time, we could look at some of those questions that a lot of people have had regarding the design of the corridor, the walkability of the corridor, all of that stuff. I know it's something you all are interested in. Obviously, if we're looking at a larger corridor, there are people that might not be involved in this group that would want to be involved in that group. But I just wanted to remind everybody of that, as well as something that Supervisor Alcorn said at the first meeting of this group, which is that all of the opinions are important, and we can pass something along to the board without total agreement. So if there's different perspectives, those will all be shared as we move this forward to the Board of Supervisors. So thank you.
Thank you, Mark. You can also repeat that next time too. Rob, you want to close us out?
Absolutely. I want to thank I want to thank everybody again. Great job on the county team, and you've given us a lot to think about. And feel free to bring your questions to us via email in between now and November 19th, our next meeting, and we'll try to get some answers to everybody. So thank you, everybody, and have a great night.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jose.